And Sharon, I'm going to bring in now our correspondent, SABC News correspondent Sophie Mokoena, joining us now on another matter that we are monitoring in Chicago in the US, and that is the memorial service for Reverend Jesse Jackson. And maybe let's start off here. I mean, talking about war and talking about conflict, and would know Jesse Jackson for somebody who fought for human rights, who also went as far as fighting for justice. And when you look at those characteristics, what can we expect when we see this memorial service being held and the speakers thereof who will be speaking at this memorial service? All right, Sharon, you can come in.
Is that for me? That one's for me.
Yes,
I've got you. Sorry, I thought you were going to Sophie. My apologies. No, absolutely. It's definitely going to come up. This will be a political event in many ways. And if you look at who's going to be in the room at the House of Hope, a 10,000-seater venue in Chicago, Illinois, for what they're calling the public homegoing of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson, who, as you recall, Mbali, passed on February 17th. So it has taken quite some time, almost 3 weeks, to get to this point. And one imagines that the schedules and calendars of all the dignitaries that are going to be present there was something that had to sort of coalesce, and it took time to get to that. I'll tell you who will be in the room. Governor J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, Democrat, the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. And we're also expecting to hear from the likes of former presidents Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden. Former Vice President Kamala Harris is said to be among the speakers there today. Members of the Jackson family. You'll recall that one of his sons is also a member of Congress today. And then some of the performances, Chicago-born singer and actress Jennifer Hudson is expected to perform. Grammy legends Pastor Marvin Winans and BB Winans, a Grammy winner, expected to perform. And as much as this is going to be, sort of going to the black church and a celebration of life, there will certainly be overtones about this moment in American history under the Trump administration, and of course how the United States is projecting that image around the world, particularly in the context of the war in Iran. So certainly within the next hour, lots to look forward to coming out of Chicago today.
Certainly, Sharon. I'm going to bring in now Sophie Mokoena. And Sophie, as Sharon there mentions what we can look forward to on the memorial service at around 7 o'clock this evening, South African time. In South Africa, we saw the Nelson Mandela Foundation. They are also honoring the legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Also there, a very important and strategic relationship he had with South Africa, Sophie. Maybe just give us a bit of background when it comes to Jesse Jackson and the role he played during the apartheid regime, particularly for Black South Africans.
He was part of the Black Caucus and the movement in the United States of America that supported the fight for liberation, and they were mobilizing support in the United States of America with many others. But I think what led to him having this quest to ensure that he does support those who are vulnerable, working with people like Martin Luther King, was indeed a moment in history where they were fighting injustice in the United States of America, but around the world also. And therefore, he continued to support the struggle. We know that these are the people that liberation organizations could count on in terms of pushing the agenda of the Liberation Organization and also the freedom of South Africa. We know that he did visit South Africa during the elections in 1994 as an observer, but also to report on what was happening. And then secondly, he did come to South Africa again but prior to 1994, he had visited the country after the killing of Steve Bantu Biko. And then 94 during election as a monitor or an observer and to report on elections, because at that time, the liberation organizations called on international community and organizations to come to South Africa to monitor elections to ensure that nothing goes wrong. And therefore, they were here, many, including your multilateral organizations, such as the Organization of African Unity, at that time representing the continent, the United Nations, the Commonwealth, the European Union. And you also had these NGOs and individuals and groups that supported the struggle. And of course, he then visited South Africa in 2012. Actually, I spoke to him at the airport in Bloemfontein. That was when the ANC was celebrating its centenary, 100 years. As you know, that it was launched in Bloemfontein in 1912. He was there, and when he spoke to me, he was very happy because here you have a situation where the organization that he supported during the struggle reaching that milestone. And therefore, later in 2013, he was awarded the O.R. Tambo in silver. You know that O.R. Tambo, it's given to international people and community and organizations that supported South Africa. And of course, then later he came in 2018 during Mewini Madikizela Mandela's funeral. And the next day, they even embarked on a walk with President Cyril Ramaphosa, who last year met his son and also met some Americans in the United States of America on the margins of the UNGA, lobbying support again, because you know that this tension between South Africa and the United States of America, many people are saying, go back to the basics, revive those friends that supported South Africa struggle, and go back to them to mobilize them, focus on ordinary South Africans.
And so if you're looking at his activism, how important was his relationship with South Africa?
It was very important because you could lobby support from America. You had people who are independent, who can support South Africa to be free, but after elections, when South Africa was free, continue to lobby support so that even investors and people in the United States of America must support South Africa. You know, there's hard diplomacy and there's soft diplomacy. First, soft diplomacy works in terms of individuals supporting the country, not necessarily the governments.
And Sherwin, I'm going to bring you in now. How have Americans reacted to the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson?
Well, there were all the former presidents, including the incumbent President Donald Trump, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Bidens. There has been an overwhelming response to the death of the late Reverend Jackson, but also an understanding that, his decline had been quite public. He, of course, his last public appearance was during the Democratic National Convention that happened to be in Chicago, and formally nominating then Vice President Kamala Harris, who would then eventually lose to Donald Trump. And, the Reverend Jackson was wheeled out with his family. Al Sharpton was there. Didn't speak, but acknowledged the crowd, waved at them. But one could see, the decline that Parkinson's and an additional neurological disorder that limited his ability to speak and his body movements, the effect that was having on him. And President Ramaphosa is actually en route to Chicago, not for today's public memorial, but a more private one that will be held on Saturday in Chicago at the insistence of the family. And of course, I'll recall what President Ramaphosa said about Jesse Jackson in his statement acknowledging the passing. We are sad to bid farewell to a global moral authority who gave voice to struggles within the United States, as well as struggles for fundamental human rights and democracy around the world, including our own. Mentored by the equally resolute and charismatic Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, devoted himself to the cause of justice as a human endeavor without borders. And so what you will see, I think, in Chicago at the House of Hope today is a packed auditorium and a great deal of tribute to a man whose legacy is very much tied to the history of the United States, the ongoing struggle for economic freedom around the world. We might, Jesse Jackson would always talk about having attained political freedom in many ways, which will resonate in a place like South Africa, but recognizing the deficits that still exist in terms of the social progress that countries are making, even in the United States, and the economic freedom that remains a challenge for all of us.
All right, Sherwin, thank you so much for that update. That is SABC News correspondent there, Sherwin Bryce-Peace, giving us the latest when it comes to what we can look forward to much later today pertaining to the memorial service of Reverend Jesse Jackson, as well as Sophie Mokoena, SABC News specialist correspondent there.